Edge of a muddy rural village, late Middle Ages. You, a peasant, are present. Hey there. Something about tonight feels charged, like the hush before a thunderstorm, except the only thing crackling is the straw poking through your ancient cloak. The stars are just starting to blink awake, and the air carries that mossy, slightly sour scent of damp earth and animals bedding down for the night. What you do not know yet is that before the sun rises again, you will discover just how creative you can get when it comes to finding a place to sleep, and that even a graveyard can feel oddly inviting when your feet ache and your belly is empty. If you do enjoy slipping into the shoes, or, more likely, the splintery clogs of someone from the past, only stick around if this sort of bedtime journey is your cup of mead. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's turn this into a cozy, worldwide sleepover. Now, dim the lights, wriggle into your comfiest position, and let's step out together into the medieval night. It's late in the Middle Ages, and you're standing at the edge of your small rural village, itchy beneath a rough wool tunic, with a stick in one hand and a slab of bread in the other. The fields behind you are familiar, but the road ahead looks as uncertain as a wet Monday morning. You're not a noble, just a poor peasant, traveling light and hungry, with your only cloak more holes than cloth. Leaving home isn't a holiday. It's a leap into discomfort, with a faint blessing from Father Martin, and maybe, if you're lucky, half a turnip for courage. In short, you're out here with nothing but hope, a scratchy cloak, and the nagging sense you've forgotten something important. The village fades behind you, swallowed by darkness and the soft bleating of sheep. You shuffle forward, each step sounding less like a journey and more like a reluctant shuffle toward the world's draftiest inn. The stick in your hand is meant for dogs, or maybe for the odd goose with an attitude, but secretly you hope it might scare away whatever rustles in the hedgerows after dusk. You have no map, no purse, jingling with coins, only a crust of bread that's already getting stale, and a cloak that lets in more breeze than comfort. If you feel underprepared, that's because you are. Most peasants in your shoes would be too. The road, a churned ribbon of mud, seems to stretch forever, vanishing into the chilly blue gloom. Somewhere behind you, a barn owl calls, a reminder that at least one creature is comfortable tonight. You can almost smell the hayloft from here, sweet, dusty and warm, though also thick with the humid tang of manure and animals. You try not to think about what you left behind, or the fact that your bed, such as it was, at least didn't move in the night. The countryside is a patchwork of distant barking dogs, and the occasional creak of a cartwheel. You wonder if you should have asked Father Martin for a second blessing, or, better yet, a blanket. Travelling as a poor peasant in the Middle Ages is not for the faint of heart. You are not making this journey for the thrill of it, but because you must. Maybe it's work you seek, or a distant shrine for pilgrimage, or perhaps you're simply fleeing a landlord with a memory like a hawk and a temper to match. Whatever your reason, the road is as stingy with comfort as a miser with his last penny. Each step squelches into the mud, the chill seeping steadily through the holes in your boots, and you realize that every mile away from home is a mile further from the handful of things that made life bearable. You glance at the fields on either side, dark, lumpy, and dotted with mysterious heaps. Sleeping in a field is always an option if you're feeling brave or desperate. But there's a price. Cow dung is only the beginning, There are thistles, sharp as a tanner's tongue, and the occasional, inexplicably angry sheep. Worst of all, if you pick the wrong spot, you might wake up with a hoof to the ribs, or find yourself the unwilling pillow for a passing cow. The ground is damp. The moss clings to your cloak, and every small movement brings a fresh wave of cold through your bones. You look for something better. A barn, perhaps, with its promise of dry straw and the muffled warmth of sleeping animals. Of course, barns belong to someone, and the last thing you want is to wake up to an irate farmer waving a pitchfork. Still, the smell of hay is tempting, and you can almost feel the prickle of straw against your cheek. Sometimes you might risk it, slipping quietly through a broken plank, curling up in a corner, hoping the cows are in a generous mood. There are worse beds, you tell yourself, though not many. But tonight, the barns are all locked up. You shuffle on. Your feet begin to ache in earnest, and the bread in your hand has lost its appeal. The night grows colder, the wind biting at your ears. You wrap your ragged cloak tighter, but the holes seem to multiply. You start to envy the crows, who at least don't have to worry about sleeping arrangements. Every so often, you pass a hedgerow that looks just inviting enough to consider. But the thought of waking up with brambles stitched into your sleeve makes you press on. After an eternity, or maybe just an hour, you spot something ahead, the silhouette of a church, hunched against the night sky. Churches are a beacon for travelers, even peasants with nothing to offer but a hopeful look and a muttered prayer. Some churches have sheltered porches, called leash gates, where the weary can find a dry corner out of the wind. You shuffle closer, drawn by the promise of shelter. The lich gate is little more than a wooden awning over stone steps, but tonight it might as well be a palace. The air here is tinged with incense and old stone, and the sounds of the night quiet a little as you slip beneath the overhang. You settle onto the cold stone, pulling your knees to your chest and tucking your hands beneath your arms. The churchyard is silent, except for the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional creak of the lich gate in the wind. The scent here is a strange mix: moss, damp earth, and something faintly sweet, like candle wax left behind after a service. You allow yourself to rest, just for a moment, knowing that the church is unlikely to turn away, a traveler who keeps quiet and causes no trouble. But even this small comfort comes with its own drama. The stone is cold, and every gust of wind finds its way under your cloak. You imagine the church is dead, slumbering quietly beneath the earth, probably warmer than you are. The irony isn't lost on you, and, with a dry chuckle, you shift to find a less bony spot. The bread is now as hard as the stone beneath you, but you nibble at it anyway. Just as you are drifting into something like sleep, you hear a distant bell. It could be a monastery not far from here. Monasteries are famous for their hospitality, though you know from stories that the monks are sometimes overwhelmed by the sheer number of bedraggled travelers turning up at their gates. When the guest house is full, rumor has it that travelers sometimes sleep in the cloister, huddled against the walls, surrounded by the low murmur of prayers and the warm glow of candlelight leaking through shuttered windows. You weigh your options. Risk another freezing hour on the road, or try your luck at the monastery's gate, hoping the monks are in a charitable mood tonight. You decide to wait, savoring the momentary shelter of the lich gate, even as your toes slowly lose all feeling. It's hard to believe. but this chilly church porch feels more luxurious than your own bed back home. The road has a way of resetting your standards. A sudden gust rattles the lich gate, and you tuck your chin deeper into your cloak. All around you, the world is quiet, except for the far-off lowing of cattle and the steady drip of water from the church roof. The night air tastes of wet grass and old stone. For a moment, you close your eyes, and the distant voices of monks chanting seem to drift on the wind, pulling you toward the possibility of a softer bed, or at least a warmer wall. You have not yet made your choice. For now, you are a peasant at the edge of the known world, clutching your crust of bread beneath the church's ancient roof, learning that sometimes the best you can hope for is to be slightly less cold than you might have been. The road outside the village is a ribbon of churned mud, flanked by hedges and the occasional grumpy goose. Edge of the village, late afternoon, you and your feet are both present. Just beyond the last cottage, you step out onto the open road. It is not a road so much as a brown churned ribbon, a sort of mud pie that stretches between tangled hedges and the occasional goose, who eyes you with the suspicion of a landowner. Carts dominate the center, their wheels groaning against the ruts, while chickens, pigs, and, on the worst days, a knight's entourage all compete for space. You, being lowest on the pecking order, sometimes literally, are forced to the edge, where the mud is not only deeper, but somehow colder. Every step squelches. Your shoes, if you can call them that, are two tired scraps of leather, and each squish is an icy reminder of their inadequacy. You begin to miss yesterday's blisters, which at least had the decency to be predictable. Today, new hot spots bloom with every pace, and your feet start to feel like overworked dough. Progress is measured not in miles, but in how frequently you are forced to hop to one side as a wagon lurches by, splattering your cloak with fragrant reminders of livestock. A horse passes, its hooves launching clods of mud that find your toes with uncanny accuracy. You wonder, just for a moment, if there is a medieval word for when you are too cold to care and too sore to complain. But you decide it is probably just called travel. The air smells of wet earth, manure, and the faint tang of wood smoke from the village behind you. Your cloak, damp and heavy, clings to your shoulders. Every so often, a gust of wind sneaks down your collar, and you shiver. The wool itches, and the itch seems to spread in direct proportion to your discomfort. It is a strange comfort, knowing that everyone else on this road is similarly miserable. You trudge past a group of peasants herding sheep, their faces set in the same dogged mask as yours. The only difference is that their sheep have thicker coats than you do. Before you left, you stopped at the church. The priest, Father Arnulf, was there sweeping the steps. He looked at you with a mixture of pity and resignation. "May God watch your feet," he murmured, making the sign of the cross over your head. You almost asked if there was a saint specifically for blisters, but thought better of it. Instead, you accepted half a turnip, a going-away present from the church garden, and a scrap of brown bread, both still warm from the embers. It is not exactly a feast, but you tuck them away for later, grateful for anything that is not mud or goose. As you move beyond the village boundary, the world grows wider and less forgiving. The road stretches ahead, its edges soft and uncertain, Occasionally you see a distant wagon or a cluster of travelers, but mostly it is just you, your feet, and the persistent damp cold. The only company is the steady chorus of creaking wood and distant livestock, punctuated by the occasional honk of a disgruntled goose. You try to distract yourself by counting steps, but quickly abandon the idea. Step counters, you realize, are useless here. Your real measurement is how close you are to your next blister. Each twinge in your heel is a milestone, each sharp stone a new landmark in the geography of pain. If you ever write a travel guide, it will be organized by foot injuries, not by distance. After a while, hunger gnaws at you. The bread and turnip are tempting, but you know better than to eat them now. The road is long, and you cannot count on charity at the next village. Inns do exist, of course, but they are for people with coins, and you left your last farthing with the blacksmith in exchange for a dubious patch on your shoe. The innkeepers are polite enough until they see your empty purse. Then their welcome chills faster than your toes in wet socks. Once you tried sleeping in the hayloft above an inn stable, only to be chased out by a boy wielding a pitchfork and a vocabulary rich in creative insults. Since then, you have learned to be careful where you bed down. Your stomach growls, loud enough that a passing crow seems to take offense. You decide that, for now, dignity is overrated. You trudge on, the prospect of a warm fire growing more distant with each step. It is at this moment that your left shoe, tired of pretending to be footwear, gives up entirely. The sole flaps, slapping mud against your heel. You sigh and consider the ancient universal law. When it rains, it pours, usually right down the back of your neck. The countryside opens up, fields stretching on either side of the road. Somewhere to your right, a dog barks and you see a farmhouse in the distance, smoke curling from its chimney. The thought of shelter is almost enough to make you weep, but you know better than to approach a stranger's house uninvited. The stories you have heard about trespassers are enough to keep you firmly on the public path. So you keep walking, the rhythm of your steps broken only by the occasional need to stop and shake a pebble out of your shoe. Each pause is another reminder that medieval travel is less about adventure and more about survival with a sense of humor. The sun slips lower, casting long shadows across the rutted road. The temperature drops, and you pull your cloak tighter, wishing it were made of something less itchy and more waterproof. The background noise changes too. The distant clatter of carts fades, replaced by the rustle of wind in the hedges and the soft, persistent creak of your own joints. You pass a hedgerow, its branches clawing at your sleeves. A sudden gust sends a flurry of leaves spinning around your ankles. For a moment, you imagine you are being escorted by a troop of invisible, slightly sarcastic woodland spirits. You reach a crossroads, marked by a weathered signpost whose letters have long since faded. Here, you pause. The road ahead leads deeper into the countryside, while a narrower path veers off toward the woods. You consider your options. The main road is safer, but also busier, and you risk another run-in with a knight's horse or a wagon full of turnips. The side road is quieter, perhaps more welcoming to a weary traveler, but also more isolated. You weigh your choices with the weary calculation of someone whose feet have veto power over ambition. Before you decide, another cart rattles by, its driver barely glancing in your direction. The cart is piled high with sacks of grain. and a dog rides proudly atop the load, nose in the air. For a moment, you envy the dog's position. Off the ground, warm and probably fed. You remind yourself that, in the hierarchy of medieval travel, even a dog with a job has better prospects than a peasant on the road. You settle on the main road, telling yourself that visibility is better than solitude. You adjust your cloak for the 100th time and move on, the road stretching ahead in a promise of more mud, more blisters, and, if you are lucky, the occasional patch of dry grass. You wonder, not for the first time, what it would be like to travel with a full stomach, dry feet, and a destination that included a bed. But you are a medieval peasant, and such luxuries are for stories told by firelight, not for the likes of you. As the sun dips lower and the cold deepens, you spot a distant barn silhouetted against the horizon. The sight fills you with a cautious hope, the kind reserved for people who know that a roof is only as welcoming as the farmer who owns it. But for now, it is enough. You keep walking, the promise of shelter pulling you onward, one blister at a time. Rural Europe, late Middle Ages, evening, you stand at the edge of a muddy lane, with dusk folding itself over the fields. The only other soul in sight is a figure stooped near a distant barn, a silhouette against the last bruised stripe of daylight. Your feet ache in their wool wrappings, each toe a separate protest. Behind you, the road is just a ribbon of ruts and puddles. In front, the barn is your shining beacon, at least, as much as a sagging wooden structure can shine after a week of walking. You approach, nerves jangling more than your coin pouch, which is empty anyway. Custom demands you ask the farmer before crossing the threshold, and tonight etiquette feels like a luxury for people with full bellies and dry shoes. Still, you muster your best attempt at a humble greeting. The farmer, Master Rolf, eyes you with suspicion but not malice. His beard is as thick as the barn's cobwebs, and his arms are folded like a drawbridge, refusing entry. The air between you smells of onions and earth. After a moment that could stretch a mile, Master Rolf grunts. You are granted the privilege of a corner in the hayloft, which is a bit like being offered a spot on the floor at a distant cousin's wedding, gratitude mixed with a twinge of doubt. You shuffle in, careful not to startle the cow chewing methodically in the gloom. Her eyes reflect the lamplight and track your every move. The barn's interior is a tapestry of shadows, dust motes, and the rich perfume of manure mingling with the sharper tang of old straw. Every step releases a puff of hay and the unmistakable crunch of something small scurrying away. Your bed tonight is a patchwork affair. The hay is old, flattened in places by the shifting weight of livestock, and it bristles under your thin woolen blanket. You do a quick scan for anything more animate than straw. A mouse darts by, whiskers quivering, and vanishes under a beam with the self-assurance of a local landlord. The cow lets out a snuffle and shifts, her breath warm and sweetly sour. You are not alone, and in the Middle Ages that counts as both company and a hazard. You settle in, making a half-hearted attempt to arrange the straw into something resembling a mattress. It is not much, but it is better than the open road. The barn creaks and settles around you. Somewhere overhead, a sparrow rustles in the rafters. There is a constant background chorus, the gentle lowing of the cow, the distant bleat of a sheep, and the soft, persistent chewing that sounds suspiciously like a medieval lullaby. If you listen closely, you can almost forget that you are sharing your pillow with a colony of fleas. Just as your eyes begin to close, you are reminded that every comfort comes with a price. Something sharp digs into your hip, a piece of straw, or perhaps a forgotten pitchfork tine. You shift, and the cow responds with a ponderous nudge, her horned head uncomfortably close to your shins. You freeze, heart thudding, as she sniffs your foot. The cow, it seems, is not concerned with your personal space or the sanctity of your sleep. It is at this moment you realize that barn lodging is a gamble. On one hand, you have a roof over your head, a certain warmth, and the dubious protection of livestock. On the other, you are at the mercy of creatures who do not respect boundaries, animal or human. Each creak in the beams could be the farmer checking on you, or a rat plotting to raid your meager food supply. You pull your blanket tighter, grateful for its scratchy wool, even as it itches at your neck like a persistent memory of home. Just before the last light fades from the cracks in the barn wall, Master Rolf returns. He tosses something in your direction, a hunk of bread, hard as a cobblestone, but unmistakably edible. It lands with a dull thud beside your head. You mumble a thank you, knowing that in the grand scheme of hospitality, this gesture is worth more than gold. The bread tastes of dust and salt, but it fills the empty space in your belly. The mice, ever opportunistic, edge closer, drawn by the scent of crumbs. Sleep, when it finally arrives, is a restless affair. You drift in and out, dreams punctuated by the twitch of a cow's tail or the sharp nip of a flea. The barn's rhythms become your own. The slow breathing of animals, the random gusts of cold air, the scent of straw and dung weaving itself into your dreams. You are keenly aware of every sound, the distant barking of a dog, the muted clink of iron from the farmhouse, the occasional cough from Master Rolf himself. Each noise is a reminder that you are a guest here, tolerated but not exactly welcomed. In the darkness, your mind wanders to the road behind. You measure distance, not in miles, but in the tender spots on your feet, the blisters blooming like small, angry roses. For medieval peasants, travel is less about how far you have come, and more about how much discomfort you can endure before collapsing. Leaving your village was never a light decision. It is a risk, a wager against hunger, cold, and the many small indignities that make up daily life. Somewhere in the night, the barn door rattles. Your heart leaps, but it is only the wind. The cow shifts again, her flank pressing against your leg, offering a grudging warmth. You breathe in the mossy dampness of the straw, the animal musk, and the faint aroma of bread crusts. There is a certain comfort in these simple miseries. You remind yourself that tomorrow may bring worse, a night in the open, or a farmer less inclined to charity, or a patch of thistles masquerading as a mattress. You close your eyes, floating on the edge of sleep, and think of all the other travelers stretched out under similar roofs, sharing their beds with livestock, rodents, and the persistent hope of a better night. You are not alone in your struggle. Across rural Europe, barn walls hold the secrets of countless weary bodies, each one dreaming of home, of warmth, of a meal that is not stale, bread and hope. A sudden sharp squeak near your ear startles you awake. You sit up, straw clinging to your hair, blinking in the darkness. The mice are bolder now, emboldened by your exhaustion. You shoo them away, muttering a curse that is swallowed by the barn's thick air. The cow ignores your plight, intent on her own midnight ruminations. You sigh, resigned, and lie back down. The discomfort is a constant companion, but so is the faint, stubborn ember of dignity that keeps you pushing forward. Tonight, you have survived the barn. Tomorrow, who knows? Perhaps you will find a softer bed, or at least one without horns. For now, you wrap yourself tighter in your itchy blanket, the barn's smells and sounds blending into the background hum of your uneasy dreams. The promise of rest, such as it is enough to carry you through till dawn. But as the night drags on and the cold seeps in, you know this comfort is temporary. At the break of day, when you rise to stiff limbs and a back full of straw, you will move on. The barns of rural Europe are sanctuary and trial, a reminder that every night on the road is both a challenge and a small victory. And, just as you drift off again, you wonder, will tomorrow's shelter be better, or will the fields be your only option? Edge of the road, late evening. Just you and the slow, persistent chorus of insects. It is rural Europe in the late Middle Ages, and tonight the barns are all spoken for, the farmers either too gruff or too suspicious of your patched tunic and tired eyes. You stand at the margin of a wide field, the grass already slick with dew, squinting for a patch that is less a cow's toilet and more a poor man's bed. You are not alone on this journey. The distant shuffle and lowing of livestock are constant reminders that in this world, humans are rarely the only creatures with nighttime plans. You lower yourself onto a patch of ground that looks promising, no obvious thistles, nothing too squelchy, and not directly on a track where something large and horned might decide to amble past. The grass is cold and slick, prickling through your thin woolen hose. You tug your cloak tighter, but the fabric might as well be a sieve for all the warmth it provides. Each time the wind picks up, it finds new and creative ways to sneak beneath your layers. You nestle closer to the hedgerow, hoping it will block the worst of the breeze and maybe make you a little less obvious to any farmer who might resent your presence. Not that you are trespassing, at least, not by medieval standards. Out here, a peasant's right to sleep is measured by how little trouble he causes, and how quickly he can vanish by dawn. Fields are, you discover, the default option for the rootless traveler. They are everywhere, after all, and the boundaries are more philosophical than physical. But sleeping in a field is an exercise in humility. You pick your way through the grass, wary of cow dung and the sharp surprise of a hidden thistle. You try to avoid the muddy ruts where the oxen have trudged, since no one wants to start the day with a soggy backside and the faint whiff of livestock. Every move is a negotiation between comfort and the avoidance of pain. In this way, you learn that medieval sleep is not about drifting off. It is about surviving the hours until the sun returns. You settle in, tucking your bundle beneath your head. It is not a pillow, exactly. It is a clump of moss, damp but marginally softer than the alternatives. Your mattress is the grass itself, which is, tonight, whatever the sheep left behind. The air is thick with the smell of animals and straw, an earthy blend that clings to your clothes and seeps into your dreams. You can almost convince yourself that the background creaks and distant bleats are a kind of lullaby. If you ignore the occasional snort from a nearby heifer, you hope she is as sleepy as you are. With every passing hour, the cold deepens. The dampness creeps up through your cloak and into your bones. Sleep is a series of shallow dips and startled awakenings. Your dreams are interrupted by the sharp itch of wool against skin, the persistent tickle of a wayward blade of grass, and the distant but unnerving bark of a dog. You wonder if the dog is as interested in chasing peasants as he is in chasing foxes. You hope not. You pull your legs in tighter, making yourself as small as possible, like a medieval version of rolling up in a sleeping bag. Only your sleeping bag is made of hope and questionable fabric. You never entirely relax. Each sound becomes a possible threat. A farmer with a stick, a passing bandit, or the local livestock deciding that your corner of the field is theirs by ancient bovine law. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, you are jerked awake by a snorting nose, just inches from your ear. It is usually a curious cow, mistaking you for a misplaced bale of hay. Once, you nearly roll into a fresh cowpat, and you swear softly into the darkness, cursing your luck and your nose. This is a far cry from the feather beds of castles, but at least you are not paying rent. Occasionally you find a patch at the edge of the field, where the hedgerow meets the road. This is a strategic choice. It puts a little distance between you and the livestock, and maybe, just maybe, the farmer will not notice you in the morning haze. Of course, it also means you are closer to the road, where night travelers might pass. Some are fellow peasants, just as desperate for rest. Others are less savory sorts, and you keep your bundle close, one hand always within reach. The open road is a democracy of discomfort, and everyone is trying to make the best of a bad situation. You remember, not for the first time, that maps are a luxury in this world. Monks and pirates might mark out routes and hidden coves, but for you, the landscape is read in hedgerows and the angle of the moon. You follow the well-worn paths, trusting in the rumors of a church ahead or a village beyond the rise. Pilgrimage is a common reason for travel among peasants, but you are not on a holy quest. You are simply moving, as much for survival as for salvation. Sometimes, if luck is with you, you spot the silhouette of a church against the night sky. Churches are more than just places of worship. They are landmarks, beacons for the lost and weary. Some have sheltered porches called leash gates, meant for the dead, but just as useful for the living. You have spent a night or two huddled beneath these arches, grateful for the roof overhead and the sense of being a little less exposed to the world. The stone is cold, but the shelter is real, and there is a comfort in being near sacred ground. If you are especially fortunate, a priest might offer a blessing. It is not a guarantee against wolves, demons, or bandits, but it is something, a flicker of hope in a landscape that is otherwise indifferent to your struggles. You take what comfort you can, letting the murmured Latin blend with the rustle of the wind. Sometimes you wonder if the blessing works, or if the wolves are simply not hungry tonight. Tonight, though, there is no priest, no lichgate, and no friendly barn cat to keep you company. There is only the field, the mossy dampness beneath your cheek, and the endless star-pricked sky. You close your eyes and try to focus on your breathing, counting each inhale and exhale to keep the cold at bay. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful but real. You wake to the grey light of dawn, stiff and sore, but still yourself. The grass is pressed flat where you lay, and your bundle is damp but intact. You made it through the night, and there is a certain pride in that. You gather your things, brush the worst of the dirt from your clothes, and stand. The world is quiet, save for the distant sound of livestock and the first bird calls of morning. You are tired, but the road calls you onward. Some nights the field feels too exposed, so you drift to the edge of the forest, a borderland between shelter and threat, where the trees promise both cover and new dangers. Edge of the forest, dusk, you and your bedroll. You stand at the trembling border where the fields surrender to tangled trees, the sky bleeding out its last light behind you. This is not the sort of woodland that inspires fairy tales, unless those stories end with cold feet and suspiciously rustling underbrush. The earth here is soft with last season's leaves, but the moss is already damp through your shoes. Every step squelches, and you wonder, not for the first time, if your feet will ever be dry again. Tonight, the field felt too exposed. There's always the risk of a farmer's dog. Or worse, a farmer with a stick and a strong opinion about trespassers. So you've crept into the lee of the trees, where the wind is less of a slap and more of a nagging tap on your shoulder. The forest is supposed to offer shelter, but the price is a rising chorus of invisible things. Somewhere out there, something snaps a twig with more enthusiasm than any rabbit should. You pause, clutching your threadbare cloak tighter, listening to the world rearrange itself around you. It's a gamble, really. You dodge the farmer, but trade him for wolves and bandits, or so the stories say. The threat of wolves is not just a fireside tale told to scare children. Even in the late Middle Ages, the forests of rural Europe held their fair share of hungry, four-legged opportunists. The bandits, on the other hand, are a more unpredictable breed. Sometimes you hear whispers of their laughter in the night, carried on the wind, mingling with the distant yip of a fox. You try to find a patch of ground that looks only moderately inhabited. There is no mattress, only a nest you scrape together from leaves and whatever moss has not yet succumbed to rot. The moss, for all its softness, is cold and clammy, and after a while it feels as if the chill is seeping straight through your bones. You lie on your side, one cheek pressed to a lumpy pillow of forest debris, and try not to think about what might be crawling underneath. If you had a map, you could try to locate a proper village or a safe barn, but in this world, maps are the luxury of monks or the odd pirate, not your average peasant. You are left with the original GPS, the stars, and your best guess at which mossy trunk points you toward the next town. The only signpost here is the hooting of an owl and the occasional glint of moonlight on wet bark. As the night deepens, the forest's soundtrack sharpens. There is the steady drip of condensation from branch to leaf, the distant rhythmic clank of a cowbell lost somewhere on the far edge of the trees, and, always, the undercurrent of potential danger just beyond your vision. The cold is not the polite chill of a late autumn walk, but a biting, insistent presence that creeps up your sleeves and down your back. You tuck your hands under your armpits, shivering, and try to remember the last time you felt truly warm. Your cloak, which once belonged to someone taller and possibly less flea-ridden, does its best to repel the damp. Still, the smell of wet wool and old sweat is a comfort. It reminds you, at least, that you are not alone. Across the way, you spot another bundle of rags curled beneath a tree. Another traveller, or perhaps just a heap of forgotten clothes. In the dark, it's hard to tell the difference. You consider calling out, but the etiquette of the medieval forest is clear. Silence is safer than curiosity. You shift, seeking a comfortable spot, but the forest floor is a conspiracy of roots and stones. Somewhere nearby, a hedgehog snuffles through the leaves, and you flinch, heart pounding. The modern urge to check under the bed for monsters is not much use here. Your bed is a pile of leaves, and the monsters are, regrettably, not imaginary. You pull your feet in close, hoping the worst thing you'll encounter tonight is an inquisitive badger. For a moment, you remember the roadside shrines you passed earlier. They are not exactly hotels, but if you're lucky, they might offer a sliver of shelter from the rain. Stone ledges just wide enough for a weary body. Some hold chipped statues of the Virgin Mary or a local saint, their features softened by centuries of weather. If you squint, you might even see a relic tucked behind a rusty grate. Tonight, that seems a world away. The forest is your only roof, the stars your ceiling. Insects are the uninvited guests of the medieval forest. They arrive in battalions, undeterred by your half-hearted attempts to swat them away. Every itch is a new adventure. You scratch, and the sound is loud in the hush. The bite of a flea is sharp, but the knowledge that you are not the only thing seeking shelter here is sharper still. You close your eyes, but sleep is slow to come. The ground is unyielding, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. When you finally drift off, it is a shallow, restless slumber, half dream, half vigilance. Every unfamiliar sound prees your eyes open. You count the hours by the cold, each one a little more numbing than the last. Eventually, you surrender. Dawn comes as a pale suggestion, a thinning of the darkness rather than a true sunrise. Your limbs ache, and your joints complain as you stand. You brush a slug from your sleeve, shake the leaves from your hair, and wonder if anyone has ever managed to look dignified after a night like this. You take stock. No wolf bites, no mysterious bruises that weren't there yesterday. A small victory. Your dignity, meanwhile, is as rumpled as your cloak, but you are alive, and the road still leads forward. The forest edge recedes behind you as you limp toward the faint outline of a church spire on the horizon. The hope of stone walls, even if only as cold as the earth, is enough to put a bit of spring in your step. You tell yourself that tonight, maybe, you'll find sanctuary beneath a lich gate, or at least a bench not inhabited by beetles. The forest, for all its dangers, has let you pass. The journey continues, discomfort trailing behind like a stubborn dog. You shoulder your pack, adjust your cloak, and set your sights on the promise of the churchyard ahead. Churchyard, dawn, you alone beneath a lich gate, the drizzle whispering against the mossy slates. You wake slow, ankles stiff, cheek pressed to a stone that, while technically holy, has all the warmth of an old turnip. The air is thick with the musty tang of wet wool and crushed grass, and a suggestion of incense lingers near the church door, as if the prayers of last night's vespers are still trying to crawl out from under the eaves. Your blanket, which is really just a scratchy length of undyed wool, is now more sponge than cloth. But at least the rain has not found you entirely, and this is what passes for a win. The lych gate overhead is a proper stone arch, its timbers swollen with years of mist and the secrets of countless travellers before you. You imagine you are not the first to huddle here, and certainly not the last. The locals know all the tricks. Some of them eye you with that wary look people reserve for unfamiliar dogs, or for relatives who show up just as the bread is coming out of the oven. You are, after all, one more soul in a long line of wanderers, and the church porch is not an inn, even if it feels like one in moments like this. The churchyard itself is a patchwork of worn stones and muddy grass, the kind of place where every second step is a gamble, soggy earth, or an unexpected grave marker. Your feet, already damp, sink into the moss at the edge, and you catch the sharp scent of cold iron from the old gate latch. Overhead, a couple of crows are locked in a debate about breakfast, and a rooster from somewhere beyond the wall announces the world's least enthusiastic sunrise. The air is colder than you hoped, but at least it is not filled with the barking of dogs or the shouts of bandits. There's something to be said for that kind of peace. It is true that sleeping near holy ground is meant to keep away evil spirits and, more pressingly, the kind of thieves who are superstitious enough to leave well enough alone. You are not certain if this is because of faith, or because even the boldest of cutpurses knows better than to tangle with a priest before breakfast. Either way, you count yourself safer here than you would be in the open fields, where the only thing standing between you and mischief is your own ability to blend in with the hedgerow. Of course, the church porch is not entirely without its hazards. There is the matter of the village constable, who patrols the edge of the yard with a lantern and a look that says he'd rather be anywhere else. He passes by before dawn, boots squelching in the mud, and eyes you as if weighing whether you are a penitent or just another vagrant. You give him your most innocent shrug, the one that says, "I am only here for the prayers and not, say, the chickens." For medieval peasants, leaving your home village was always a gamble. The road is hard, the welcome uncertain, and every new place is a test of luck and humility. Still, the porch offers a kind of truce. There is shelter from the drizzle, a low wall to lean against, and a roof that keeps the worst of the weather at bay. You nestle your bundle, half bread, half hope, under your arm, listening to the faint hum of bees waking somewhere in the church's eaves. The church bell, cracked and reluctant, chimes the hour. Its echo bounces around the yard, startling a family of mice from a pile of leaves. There is something oddly comforting about the sound. It reminds you of the rhythm of the seasons, of how even the poorest traveller can find a moment of belonging under the same sky. Sometimes, if you are lucky, another traveller will join you, a thin woman with a faded scarf perhaps, or an old man with a pack that smells suspiciously of onions. You exchange the briefest of greetings, the universal language of the road, a nod, a grunt, a sideways glance at the bread. You both understand that the porch is neutral ground. No one will ask your name or your business, as long as you do not snore too loudly or leave a mess behind. The real luxury here is not the stone or the shelter, but the feeling that for one night you are untouchable. The church's presence is like an invisible fence, keeping away the worst of the world's troubles. The only price you pay is a little suspicion, and perhaps the occasional cold shoulder from the church warden, who sweeps past on his way to unlock the door. He mutters something about God's house, not a hostel, but he leaves you alone. In the Middle Ages, this is as close to customer service as you are likely to get. Still, sleeping outdoors is never your first choice. You think longingly of warm hay lofts and the gentle snorts of cows, of the rare nights when a barn door opened and you were invited in. The churchyard is a compromise, a place where you trade comfort for security and hope that the only thing nipping at your toes in the night is the cold. As the sky shifts from charcoal to a pale, uncertain blue, you gather your things. The drizzle has slowed to a fine mist, and the scent of the damp earth is joined by the faint aroma of baking bread from somewhere nearby. You wonder, briefly, if you might manage a crust from the bakery, or if the day's luck will run to little more than a handful of wild sorrel. Either way, you steel yourself for the next stretch of road. The villagers begin to stir. A pair of boys dart past, their laughter bouncing between the gravestones, and an old woman with a basket eyes you with practiced suspicion. You stand, brushing the clinging mud from your knees, and offer a polite nod. She sniffs, but does not chase you off. It is a small victory, but you count it all the same. You leave the churchyard behind, the stones slick beneath your boots. The comfort of shelter fades, replaced by the familiar uncertainty of the open road. But there is a kind of pride in it, too. You have survived another night, kept your dignity, and, most importantly, kept your bread safe from the crows. Not every traveller can say the same. Just ahead, the path bends toward a crossroads. The fields on either side are heavy with dew, and the distant shapes of cattle drift like ghosts among the hedges. You catch a glimpse of something unusual, a low stone alcove at the meeting of the lanes, sheltering what looks like a faded carving of a saint. Your feet slow, curiosity pricking at the dull ache in your calves. Perhaps you think there is another kind of shelter to be found here, if only for a moment. You step off the road, the grass brushing against your ankles, and draw closer to the shrine. The world feels very old and very quiet, as if it is holding its breath. For now, you are simply a traveller, searching for rest wherever you can find it. Dawn, a muddy crossroads somewhere between two villages in rural Europe. You and your aching feet are the only creatures awake aside from a crow, who seems suspiciously interested in your last crust of bread. There's a mist curling along the ditches, and your breath puffs white as you pull your cloak tighter, though it does about as much good as wrapping yourself in a wet towel. It's early in the late Middle Ages, and you're on the road because you have to be. Maybe work, maybe pilgrimage, maybe the sort of family drama that ends with someone storming off with a sack of onions and a lot of opinions about cousins. What you do not have, as you quickly realize, is a reservation anywhere. In fact, your only hope for shelter is the squat little stone shrine at the crossroads, barely taller than a barrel and about as roomy. This shrine, you notice, is not designed for comfort. The roof, slate slightly askew, leaks in a way that feels both personal and deliberate. The alcove itself is just wide enough for you to squeeze in, knees drawn up, nose nearly touching the faded wooden face of a saint. There's a stub of candle wax at his feet, melted down and cold. The saint's gaze is fixed somewhere above your head, as if he's seen 1,000 shivering peasants before you and can't quite bring himself to look at another. You wonder, briefly, whether he ever wanted this job. The stone is slick with moss, and you can smell the ancient damp, mingled with the faintest memory of incense, a sort of holy mildew. It is, by roadside accommodation standards, not much better than the world's oldest bus-stop bench. You huddle in the alcove, cloak bunched beneath you for insulation. As you shift, a sharp piece of gravel reminds you that medieval road maintenance is more of a suggestion than a practice. Your woolen cloak is rough, the fibers itchy against your neck, and it offers little protection from the biting cold. You recall, with a mixture of longing and resignation, that your cloak was once part of a sheep you helped shear yourself, though you suspect the sheep had a better time wearing it than you do now. Hunger gnaws at you, a dull, familiar ache. Breakfast is a memory, yesterday's crust, gone the way of all good things. You fish around your pouch and find half a turnip, a departing gift from the village priest, who pressed it into your hand with a wink and a whispered blessing. You nibble on it, savouring the earthy crunch. It is not much, but it is something. Outside, the road is empty, save for the sound of distant livestock. Somewhere a cow moans, and the wind carries the faint, sour scent of manure. You pull your knees in tighter, feeling the chill seep through stone, through wool, through skin. This is the reality of sleeping rough in the Middle Ages. Shelter is a matter of luck and timing. Shrines like this are scattered along pilgrimage routes, intended more as spiritual pit stops than hostels. They're supposed to keep away evil spirits, not the drizzle. Sometimes, if you're lucky, there's a statue of Mary or a local saint, faded from too many winters, or a relic, though you suspect the local children have made off with most of those by now. You whisper a quick prayer, more for luck than faith, eyes darting to where a candle might have flickered if you had a match. The ritual is automatic, the words shaped by cold lips. You wonder if it matters. In the silence, you become aware of the creak of your own joints, the persistent itch of straw, and the tiny patrols of insects exploring the hem of your cloak. Each time you shift, the stone beneath you gives a little, as if the shrine itself is tired of your company. For a moment, you close your eyes and imagine a real bed, thick straw, maybe even a blanket, something that does not smell like wet sheep. Then a drop of rain lands on your forehead, and reality returns. The best you can say is that you are not entirely drenched. The shrine is just big enough to keep your shoulders dry, though your knees poke out into the open air. You tuck your feet under your cloak and try to ignore the sensation of water slowly wicking up your hose. The wind shifts. The candle stub rattles in its holder. You become aware, with a kind of resigned amusement, that you are sharing this sacred space with a spider the size of your thumb. He seems unbothered by your presence, which you take as a good omen, or at least a sign that you are not the worst guest the shrine has hosted. The dawn creeps in slowly, the grey light seeping across the fields, until you can just make out the muddy ruts of the road ahead. You listen for footsteps, the jangle of a pack. any sign that another traveler might join you. But all you hear are the distant complaints of cattle and the slow, rhythmic drip of water from the roof. You shift again, trying to relieve the numbness in your legs. The rough wool of your cloak scratches at your skin, and you remember the warning from old Bertram back in the village. Sleeping rough will give you more than fleas. It'll give you stories you never wanted. You suspect he was right on both counts. Still, there is something oddly comforting about the shrine. The saint's expression is unchanging, but you like to think he is rooting for you in his own silent way. It's a partnership of sorts. You keep him company. He keeps the worst of the weather at bay. The sky brightens, and you realize you have survived another night. There is dignity in making do, in finding shelter where you can, even if it's a damp stone alcove with a wooden saint for company. Your stomach rumbles, reminding you that, while spiritual protection is all well and good, a loaf of bread would not go amiss. You stand, joints stiff, and brush the moss from your cloak. The shrine has done its job, barely. You step out onto the road, squinting at the horizon. The journey continues, and you are a little colder, a little hungrier, but still moving. The memory of last night's shelter lingers, equal parts gratitude and relief. You leave the crossroads behind, feet squelching in the morning mud. The wind has picked up, carrying with it the promise of another long day. You pull your cloak tighter, knowing it will do little to keep the cold out. Still, there is hope. Somewhere ahead, beyond the next bend, the silhouette of a monastery rises against the sky, a beacon for the weary, or at least a place where a wall and a warm meal might be had for a blessing and a bit of honest work. The road stretches on, uncertain but familiar, and you follow it, step by step, toward whatever shelter the next night might bring. Monastery gate. Dusk. You and a ragtag line of fellow travelers. The sky over rural Europe has faded to a sullen indigo, and the last of the crews have finished their complaints for the day. You shuffle your aching feet closer to the heavy wooden doors, feeling the chill seep up from the damp earth. The road behind you is little more than a muddy memory, the soles of your boots squelching with every step. Tonight, you are not alone. A hunched woman with a patched shawl, a boy carrying an empty basket, and an old man with a limp all form a loose queue. Each of you eyes the monastery walls, waiting for a sign of movement or mercy, or both. Your stomach grumbles, a low, sullen protest that is quickly drowned out by the distant bleating of sheep somewhere beyond the stone walls. You can smell them too, their wool and manure scenting the air, mingling with the mossy dampness that clings to your cloak. The wind tugs at your hood, finding every gap and flaw in your defenses. It's the kind of cold that makes your bones feel thin, as if you might snap rather than shiver. You knock again, twice, then 3 times, each rap echoing slightly less confidently. The wood is old, studded with iron, and your knuckles sting. Behind you, the old man coughs, a sound as dry as straw. Someone mutters a prayer for warmth. You glance up at the silhouette of the monastery, its windows aglow with a faint yellow promise. But the door stays closed. This is the medieval version of waiting in line at a packed hostel, except the only thing you're guaranteed is suspense. Some nights, the monks open the door quickly, and you're swept inside before you can even finish your silent negotiations with the Almighty. Other nights, You spend hours pressed against the gate, trading stories or silence with your fellow hopefuls. The suspense is part of the ritual. Will you find shelter, or will the night swallow you whole? When the door finally creaks open, the sound is almost shocking in the hush. A monk appears, his robe brushing the flagstones, his face unreadable in the torchlight. He surveys the crowd with a quiet gravity, as if weighing each soul. You straighten your shoulders and try to look harmless, or at least less desperate than the next person. The monk's gaze lingers on your muddy boots, your empty hands, the hopeful tilt of your chin. Then, with a nod, he steps aside. The gate swings wider, and you are beckoned in. Crossing the threshold, you leave behind the biting wind and step into a world of muted candlelight and soft echoes. The air is warmer, scented with wood smoke and something more enticing. Broth, maybe, or the memory of it. You hear the gentle clatter of bowls, the distant murmur of prayer. The floor beneath your feet is rough-hewn stone, uneven but blessedly dry. The monk leads you and the others to a corner of the guest hall, where a few straw pallets lie scattered. The room is cavernous, the ceiling lost somewhere in the gloom above, and every sound seems to multiply. There are wooden benches along the walls and piles of hay for bedding. Some nights you might get a blanket, thin but serviceable. Other nights you make do with your cloak and the warmth of your own breath. You breathe in the scent of straw and old wood, grateful to be out of the wind, if only for a night. Hospitality, the monks call it. Not charity exactly, more like an obligation, handed down from rules older than these stones. You are expected to behave, to keep your voice low, and to refrain from stealing anything that is not nailed down. In exchange, you receive shelter and, if fortune smiles, a bowl of soup or a crust of bread. The soup is thin, often more water than vegetable, but it fills the hollow in your gut and warms your fingers as you cradle the bowl. Sometimes a priest appears, ladling out portions with a solemn nod, his eyes flicking over each face as if searching for stories left untold. The rules are simple. No coin changes hands. But gratitude and good behavior are the price of admission. You share the space with strangers, each lost in their own thoughts or quietly comparing blisters. The old man with the limp settles beside you, sighing as he eases himself onto the straw. The boy with the empty basket curls up at the far end, hands tucked beneath his chin. You all listen to the background creaks of ancient beams and the distant rhythmic chanting from the chapel, a lullaby for the weary if you have the imagination for it. You find yourself drifting, the day's aches fading as the warmth seeps into your limbs. The straw itches, and there's a faint smell of livestock, remnants of travelers past, or maybe just the memory of barn nights. You remember those nights well, sleeping in barns, risking a startled cow's hoof or a surly farmer's broom. Compared to that, the monastery is a palace, even if the hay sticks to your hair and the cold seeps up from the floor. Still, you know not to get too comfortable. The monks are early risers, and their hospitality has a strict expiration. Before dawn, the chanting begins in earnest, echoing through the stone corridors, pulling you from your dreams with gentle persistence. You sit up, rubbing your eyes, blinking in the faint candlelight. The boy with the basket is already awake, staring at the door as if willing it to open. A monk appears, gesturing for you to rise. No words are needed. You gather your cloak, brush the straw from your sleeves, and shuffle toward the exit with the others. Outside, the sky is just beginning to lighten, the world wrapped in blue-gray mist. Your breath hangs in the air, and the road stretches out before you, still muddy, still unwelcoming, but now a little less daunting for the promise of a warm meal behind you. You step out, blinking at the cold, and glance back at the monastery. Tonight you were lucky. Tomorrow the road may lead you elsewhere, a field, a barn, the uncertain shelter of a churchyard. For now you walk on, the sound of chanting fading behind you, the taste of broth lingering on your tongue. The discomforts of peasant travel are never far, but neither are small mercies. The journey continues, always a little hungry, always a little hopeful. Just ahead, you catch the scent of wood smoke on the wind. Maybe, if you keep moving, you'll find another door that opens before the wolves find you. Inside, the monastery guest hall is a cavernous space lined with wooden benches and scattered piles of hay. Find you. Inside. Monastery guest hall, late evening, you and a handful of mud-caked travelers huddled beneath flickering candlelight. You step inside, and the world shifts. Gone is the biting air outside, replaced by a cavernous hush and the thick, earthy perfume of straw. The warmth is so immediate, it feels suspiciously generous, like a hot shower in a budget hostel. Except here, the closest thing to a shower is rainwater dripping from your sleeves. The monks who tend this place glide by in brown wool habits, their faces obscured by hoods, their feet silent on the flagstones. Their presence is as steady and unyielding as the heavy wooden benches that line the hall. Your fellow travelers, some as ragged as you, others with cloaks only slightly less threadbare, have already claimed spots along the walls. There is no scramble for the best seat. You all know the rules by now. Gratitude first, questions later, and never, under any circumstances, make a fuss over who gets the hay pile with fewer thistles. The monks offer you a bowl of broth and a chunk of bread. The bread is dense, a little sour, but after days of gnawing on whatever you could find in hedgerows, it tastes almost alarmingly festive. The broth is more like vegetable-flavored water, but it is warm and fills your belly with a gentle, temporary peace. You lower yourself onto a mound of hay, feeling every prickle through the threadbare cloth of your tunic. The hay smells of last summer's sunlight and this morning's livestock, mingled with the sharp tang of old wood and the faint, persistent aroma of incense that seeps through the cracks from the chapel next door. Every shift brings a chorus of creaks from the benches. Your cloak, heavy with damp, offers little insulation. Still, you wrap it tighter, grateful for even this scratchy shield against the chill. Silence is the unspoken law here. The monks expect it, and so do your fellow guests. The only voices are the distant, echoing chants coming from the chapel, a low, almost hypnotic hum that vibrates through the stones. You let your eyes wander over the room, a solitary candle guttering on a stone ledge, the glint of a brass candlestick that you know better than to touch. A monk passes, his eyes missing nothing, and you remember the warnings whispered at the gate. No quarrelling, no creeping near relics, and certainly no sticky fingers around the church silver. You eat in silence, careful not to slurp or cough too loudly. The monks do not charge for this shelter, but their currency is discipline. One loud complaint, one ill-timed joke about St. Peter's beard, and you might find yourself back outside, reacquainted with the particular misery of dew-soaked grass and curious cattle. As the meal ends, a monk gestures toward the benches and hay. You curl up, knees to chest, cloak pulled over your head. The hay is softer than frozen earth, but less forgiving than a featherbed. Straw pokes through and scratches your neck. It is itchy in the way only rural Europe can offer. A reminder that comfort is always relative and rarely free. Your thoughts drift to the last time you tried sleeping in a field. There, the ground was cold and uneven, the grass slick with mossy damp that crept through your clothes and into your bones. You spent the night dodging cow dung, thistles, and the distant, ominous snuffling of livestock, never quite certain if the next sound would be a curious sheep or a farmer with a stick. The monastery, for all its rules and itchy hay, feels like the Ritz by comparison. A sharp bell rings somewhere above, the clang cutting through the haze of weariness. The monks file out, leaving you and the others in dim candlelight. You close your eyes, listening to the shifting of bodies, the occasional stifled cough, the relentless drone of chanting that seeps through the walls. The atmosphere is equal parts comforting and surreal. You are safe for now, wrapped in a cocoon of borrowed warmth and enforced silence. Every so often, your mind drifts back to the rules. You must not be seen near relics. You must not quarrel or shout. You must not do anything to draw attention to yourself. The monks expect gratitude and humility, qualities that come easily when the alternative is a night spent counting stars and shivering in your own skin. You realize that you have become an expert in making yourself invisible, a skill that has as much to do with survival as with good manners. In the faint glow, you watch a monk ladle out a second helping of broth for an older traveler. The old man murmurs a blessing, his gratitude audible even in the hush. Sometimes, if the priest is in a generous mood, you might even get a scrap of cheese or a handful of dried peas. Tonight, it is just bread and broth, and you are content. There is a certain dignity in this arrangement. The monks feed you, shelter you, and ask only for good behavior in return. The trade feels fair, especially when you remember the alternatives. Fields with their hidden dangers. Barns, where you must first find a farmer willing to let you in, and then endure the company of cows and the smell of manure. Forest edges, where every rustle might be a fox or something worse. You shift, trying to find a position where the hay doesn't poke you in the ribs. The candle sputters, throwing shadows along the stone walls. Someone snores quietly. The chanting from the chapel grows softer, replaced by the steady ticking of time that only a sleepless traveler can hear. You wonder, not for the first time, if there is any place in late medieval Europe where sleep comes easy. The answer, you suspect, is no. Sleep is always a negotiation. Comfort traded for safety, warmth for silence, food for humility. In this monastery guest hall, you find a balance, imperfect, but better than most. You let yourself drift. The prickly hay beneath you, the animal and straw smell in your nose, and the reassurance of thick stone walls keeping the world at bay. Just before you slip into sleep, you remember that not every night ends in hay or holiness. There are still roads to walk, barns to beg into, and fields to brave. But for now, you are here, sheltered by monks and watched over by the echo of ancient prayers. Market Square, after sundown, you alone with your battered sack and a sigh of cooling stones. Tonight, luck has washed its hands of you. No kindly barn door creaked open. No holy brother pressed a crust of bread into your palm. Instead, you are left to pick your way past the last flicker of lanterns, the market now empty, except for a few limp cabbages and a smell that is somehow part earth, part old cheese. You scan for a patch of shadow that looks soft enough to lie in, and unimportant enough for everyone else to ignore. You wedge yourself behind a market stall, the wood sticky with the memory of onions and the sharp tang of turnip peels. At your feet, a mouse considers you with the cool detachment of someone who pays no rent. The ground is hard, rough cobble that quickly finds every bone in your body. Your cloak, which at this point is more a suggestion than a garment, does its best to shield you from the dampness that creeps up from the stones. Itchy wool scrapes your neck. Moss grows in the cracks, lending the air a chill, green scent that settles uncomfortably in your nose. You pull your knees in tight, pressing your sack against your belly. It is not much, just a few personal things, but in the dark, even a sack feels like a friend. The alley behind you hums with the quiet life of things better left unseen, the soft rustle of a rat, the metallic clatter of a sign swinging in the wind, the distant bark of a dog too bored or too tired to care what you are up to. You try to make yourself invisible. On nights like these, invisibility is both your curse and your shield. After all, you are not the only one who prowls the market when honest folk are asleep. Bandits, thieves, and the occasional ruined merchant might all be seeking a softer target than each other. You pull your cloak tighter and hope you don't look worth the trouble. There is no hay here, no holy promise of a monastery's stone floor, not even a barn cat to keep you company. Instead, you have a bruised apple for a pillow, and the knowledge that, in the great pecking order of the Middle Ages, even the cows are sleeping better than you tonight. You wonder if this is how it always is for travelers with empty pockets. The stories back home made it sound like a grand adventure, but no one mentioned the way cobblestones press new shapes into your hips, or how the cold seems to find every seam in your clothes. You try to ignore the itch of wool at your wrists and the smell of old fish wafting from the next stall. You tell yourself that at least you are not out in the open, where the frost would have you for breakfast. Somewhere nearby, a horse shifts in its sleep, hooves scraping the ground. The alley's shadows swallow you whole, and for a moment you are not a person at all, but a bundle of rags and wishes. You listen to the village's sleep, the creak of wooden shutters, the splash of water dumped from a window, the faint rhythmic snore of someone who owns a bed. Each sound is a reminder that you do not belong here, not tonight. In the city, you would be just another body among many. But in a small town like this, every stranger is a question waiting to be answered, and sometimes people answer with a boot or a broom. You shift, feeling the bite of the ground through your thin shoes. Will you sleep at all? Or will you spend the night counting every distant bark and every suspicious footstep? The answer, you suspect, is a little of both. You close your eyes and try to imagine the comfort of a barn, the smell of straw and warm cows, the rare gift of a scrap of bread from a farmer who took pity on you. But tonight, the best you can hope for is that the night passes quietly and no one decides to investigate the mysterious shape behind the turnip stall. You become aware of your only company, a heap of discarded turnip peels, glistening in the moonlight, and the steady, indifferent gaze of a market dog curled just out of arm's reach. The dog puzzles over you for a moment, then resumes its nap, as if to say, "I've seen worse." That is about as much comfort as you are likely to get. The night drags on, slow as molasses. Your thoughts drift to the old stories, the ones about pilgrims sleeping under the stars and waking to find their sins washed away by dew. You wonder if anyone ever mentioned the blisters or the way fear tastes in the back of your throat. Leaving your village, you had hope for adventure. Instead, you find yourself bargaining with the dark for a little peace and a little warmth, and maybe a morning when you wake with everything you owned still in your sack. The cold settles into your bones, and you tuck your hands beneath your armpits, shivering. You think of the road ahead, more towns, more doors, more chances for a soft word or a crust of bread. Maybe tomorrow you will talk your way into a barn or find a monastery willing to forgive your sins in exchange for a day's labor. Tonight, though, you are nothing more than a shadow among shadows, hoping the world will forget you just long enough to let you sleep. Sometimes you wonder, does anyone ever get used to this? Or is every night on the road just another lesson in humility, another reminder that the comforts of home are not for the likes of you? Still, there is dignity in survival, even when it means curling up behind a market stall and making peace with a pile of turnip peels. You breathe in the night air, damp and slightly sweet, and let yourself drift, one ear always open for trouble. A rooster crows somewhere in the distance, far too early or far too late. You know that soon the market will come alive again, farmers setting up stalls, townsfolk shuffling by, all of them pretending not to see the ragged figure rising stiffly from the shadows. You will slip away before the sun is fully up, just another traveler moving on, searching for the next patch of straw or stone that will let you rest. Your cloak, if it can still be called that, has become your constant companion. Edge of a muddy cart track, late evening, just you and the world's most loyal, if begrudging, wool cloak. You draw the cloak tighter, the coarse wool biting at your neck like a sheep's gentle, persistent nibble. The air is thick with the mossy dampness that seems to seep from the very bones of rural Europe. Your knees are tucked to your chest, feet tucked beneath the heavy folds, and you pretend for a moment that you are a parcel of turnips, bundled for market. The illusion is only broken by the persistent itch and the unmistakable scent of wet livestock. A medieval peasant's cloak, you have come to realize, is a tool of many talents. It is a barrier against the wind, a scratchy pillow, a makeshift tent, and, on the worst nights, a sponge for every drop of dew. Your own is as thin as your patience, yet it is the only thing that stands between you and the biting cold, and you cling to it with the desperation of someone who knows there is no better option waiting just around the bend. The night is alive in its own way. Somewhere nearby, A cow shifts in its sleep, sending a low creak through the boards of the barn you passed earlier. You are not inside. That privilege requires coin, or at least a friendly nod from the farmer's wife. Instead, you press yourself against the tumbled stone wall, hoping it will block the worst of the wind. The ground here is a patchwork of grass and mud, cold and uninviting. Each time you shift, the cloak pulls taut, letting in a fresh draught. It is a bit like sleeping under a blanket made by someone who has never heard of warmth, but plenty about sheep. You focus on small comforts. The rough texture of the wool gives your fingers something to fidget with. Your breath makes little puffs of fog in the air, each one drifting away into the darkness. Far off, a rooster crows, either confused or ambitious. The world feels both endless and oddly contained. Your entire universe shrunk to the space beneath this cloak, and the hope that dawn will come before your toes go numb. Behind you, the road is never silent. Carts rattle past at odd hours, their wheels squelching through the mud, driven by merchants eager to reach the next market before sunrise. Sometimes you hear the clatter of hooves, knights perhaps, or more likely a farmer with somewhere urgent to be. None of them pay you any mind. To be a peasant on the road in the late Middle Ages is to be invisible until you are inconvenient. You wonder, not for the first time, how many others huddle like this, cloaks pulled tight, waiting for morning. There is a quiet solidarity in the knowledge that in almost every field, by every stretch of muddy road, someone else is enduring the same discomfort. You imagine an invisible network of shivering, itchy travelers, all united by the nightly quest for shelter, or at least a dry patch of ground. The cloak, of course, has its drawbacks. It does little to keep out the damp, which creeps in regardless of how tightly you wrap yourself. Your back aches from the hard earth, and every so often a tiny unseen creature scurries across your foot. You try not to think about what it might be. A field mouse. A flea with grand ambitions. Either way, you tuck your cloak tighter, nose wrinkling at the mingled smell of earth, straw, and animal. Some nights you are lucky enough to find a barn with a sympathetic owner. The barn is a universe of its own, thick with the scent of hay, manure, and the warm, musky breath of animals. You might wedge yourself between bales of straw, the cloak serving as a thin shield against the inevitable itch of hay and the sharper pinpricks of stray straw. The animals are indifferent companions, cows shifting, chickens muttering, the occasional rat rustling in the shadows. But barns come with their own hazards. The floor is never clean. Fleas and lice are as much a part of the scenery as the beams overhead. If you're especially unlucky, you will wake to find a chicken perched on your leg, eyeing you with a look that suggests you are the guest and not entirely welcome. Still, compared to the open road, even this scratchy, noisy haven is a luxury. When barns are out of reach, you consider the forest's edge. The trees offer a kind of shelter, their branches weaving a roof against the worst of the rain. Yet the forest is a place of whispered stories. Wolves are not just the stuff of bedtime tales. Travelers occasionally vanish, and their fate is left to the imagination. Bandits, too, are rumored to lurk in the gloom, waiting for someone with a pack worth taking. And if nature and human mischief are not enough, the forest is said to be the haunt of things less easily identified. shadows that move when they should not, and silences that feel too heavy to be natural. You weigh your options. The road is exposed, the barn is crowded, the forest is suspect. Occasionally, you stumble upon a roadside shrine, a humble stone alcove with a weathered statue of the Virgin Mary or a local saint. The offerings are humble, wilted flowers, a coin, sometimes a scrap of bread. You pause, not only to rest, but because the presence of something sacred makes the night feel less indifferent. The cold is still there, but the space feels watched, and that is a comfort all its own. You try to make yourself small, cloak pulled over your head, knees pressed tight. The stone is hard beneath you, but the faint scent of wax and old prayers lingers in the air. For a few moments you imagine you are safe, protected by the presence of saints whose only job is to mind the weary. The road itself is a living thing. By day, it is crowded with carts, oxen, and the occasional swaggering knight, all jostling for space in the mud. By night, it is quieter, but not empty. Every so often, you hear the distant jingle of harnesses or the sharp bark of a dog. Sometimes you catch the echo of a song, sung off-key by a group of travelers further down the way. You are never truly alone, but you are never quite part of the crowd either. It is in these moments, between the damp ground, the scratchy cloak, and the endless shifting noises, that you begin to understand why hope is such a stubborn thing. Each morning you wake, bones stiff and muscles aching, but alive. The cloak, for all its flaws, has done its job. You have made it to another dawn, and that is victory enough. You shift, trying to find a softer patch of earth, but the ground is as unyielding as ever. The cold has seeped into your bones, but you tug the cloak closer and close your eyes. For all its misery, the cloak is still your shield, a threadbare barrier between you and the world. You might curse it in the night, but come morning, you will shake it out, drape it around your shoulders, and set off down the road once more. Somehow, you have made it to morning. The realization settles in with a mix of relief and resignation. The sun is just beginning to lighten the horizon, and in the distance you hear the first chorus of roosters. The mossy dampness has not defeated you yet. You steel yourself for another day, another chance to find a softer bed, a warmer fire, or at least a barn with fewer fleas. Dawn seeps into the world with a chorus of distant roosters and the chill of another day on the road. Edge of a muddy road, dawn. You and a fellow peasant huddle beside a half-collapsed fence near a village outside rural France, late Middle Ages. The world is the color of wet stone, and as you blink awake, the cold is the first thing you notice. It sneaks under your patched wool tunic, making the straw you stuffed into your shirt last night feel less like clever insulation and more like a failed experiment in medieval comfort. Your companion, Alain, groans and rubs his shoulder, which has spent the night pressed against a rock masquerading as a pillow. You both eye the horizon, hopeful for warmth, but the only thing rising faster than the sun is your hunger. You sit up and brush dried leaves from your sleeve, noting how your hands still smell faintly of sheep from the last barn you shared with a dozing cow. The cow, you recall, had been gracious enough not to roll over onto your legs, though the straw had been full of tiny biting things that have left your skin itchy and red. The memory of that barn lingers in your nose, a rich blend of dung, hay, and animal sweat. It's not the sort of aroma anyone bottles for posterity, but it's oddly comforting after a night spent mostly outdoors. This morning, there's no barn in sight, just the open road, slick with last night's rain and crowded with the detritus of daily medieval life. Carts creak by, pulled by oxen with mournful eyes. A noble's retinue, horses, servants, and boots far better than yours, trots past, the smell of saddle leather and expensive soap trailing behind. You nudge Alain and mutter something about how nobles never seem to run out of shoes. He grins, showing a gap where a tooth used to be, and says if he had extra shoes, he'd trade them for a breakfast not mostly made of memories. Your own breakfast consists of a crust of bread, hard enough to double as a weapon, and a sliver of cheese that tastes like it has seen better centuries. Elaine gnaws on a wizened apple, and you both stare longingly at the distant outline of the next village. The thought of a warm meal, or even a bit of broth, is as persistent and unattainable as the itch beneath your woolen shirt. Most days on the road, hunger is your most reliable companion. The food is sparse, and what you find rarely fills the hollow in your belly. The road ahead is a patchwork of puddles and ruts. Every few steps, your foot slips, and you steady yourself with a stick you picked up 2 villages ago. The stick is less a walking aid and more a psychological comfort, something to poke at the mud or, more optimistically, to wave at any overly curious dogs. The local dogs, by the way, are not above helping themselves to your meagre pack the moment you look away. You pass a churchyard, hoping perhaps for a bit of shelter. The grass there is thick, mossy, and damp, but at least it is soft. Elaine mutters that the clergy do not love to see vagrants stretched out near the holy ground, and you nod, remembering the stern look from the priest last time you tried to nap near the gravestones. The church bell tolls, sending a flock of crows up into the cold morning air. You pause to listen, just for a moment, to the distant sounds of livestock waking and the low hum of the village coming to life. But today, the churchyard is empty, except for you and the crows. The air is sharp, filled with the scent of wet earth and last night's wood smoke. You decide to move on, as the risk of a scolding, or worse, a sharp stick from the sexton, is not worth a few moments of soft grass. The road takes you past a field where the dew clings stubbornly to the tips of wild grass. Your feet are soaked within minutes, and the cold bites through your worn shoes. You pull your cloak tighter, wishing for a miracle in the form of a dry, warm place to rest. Alain points to a distant copse at the edge of the field, suggesting you might find a bit of shelter among the trees if the rain returns. You both know that sleeping in the forest means a night of jumping at every snap of a twig. But sometimes the need for cover outweighs the fear of what lurks beyond the firelight. As the morning brightens, you reach a monastery perched atop a gentle hill. Its stone walls promise sanctuary, or at least a reprieve from the road. You recall stories of monks who open their gates to travelers, so long as you arrive before the doors close for the night. Alain is more skeptical, reminding you of that time last spring, when the monastery was so full that peasants like you were sent to sleep in the cloister, huddled among the columns with only the wind for company. He laughs, a dry sound, and says at least the wind does not snore, unlike certain travelling companions. You approach the gate, shoes squelching in the mud, and wait as a sleepy novice eyes you from the shadow of the doorway. The novice offers a place in the cloister if you work for your bread. You nod, grateful for the offer, even if it means a morning spent hauling firewood or scrubbing pots. The promise of soup and shelter, no matter how thin or draughty, is enough to make you forget for a moment the ache in your bones. Inside the cloister, the air is cool and smells faintly of old stone and candle wax. You settle onto a bench beneath an archway, feeling the hard surface press into your spine. Alan dozes beside you, snoring softly. Around you, the world stirs. Monks in brown habits whispering prayers, the distant clatter of pans, the soft shuffle of bare feet on flagstones. It is not home, but it is safer than the open road, and you allow yourself a moment of quiet relief. You stare at the monastery garden, where green shoots push up through the black soil. The sight is a promise, a reminder that spring will come, and with it, perhaps, an easier journey. For now, you savor the simple luxury of not shivering. You eat your bread slowly, letting the warmth from the soup seep into your fingers. The day ahead will be long, but you have survived another night. The journey is made of moments like these, a patch of soft moss, the kindness of a stranger, a meal that tastes of hope more than flavor. You know that soon enough, you will be back on the road, braving mud, cold, and the constant search for a safe place to sleep. But for now, you rest. In the late medieval world, that is sometimes the greatest comfort of all. You close your eyes, the sounds of waking monks and distant livestock fading, and let yourself dream of a world where shelter and a warm loaf of bread are not so hard to find.